So let's make sure we show a loading spinner if we are, well, waiting for the HTTP request to complete. To do that, we of course need to manage an extra piece of state. Maybe isLoading and setIsLoading are appropriate names with useState, and initially that's false. I need to manage state here because we'll change this, and every change should lead this ingredients component to re-render so that we can update our loading state and show something in the UI. Now, when we're adding an ingredient, let's say, then I want to set isLoading to true. We do this right before we call fetch. Once we got a response, however, I want to set it to false because now we're done. So I'm updating my state here with these calls to set isLoading. This, of course, will also mean that we re-render the component. And now we can use our loading indicator to, well, output whether we're loading or not. We could display this indicator in all kinds of places. I like to display it in my ingredient form, but it's up to you. I will add a loading prop here and point at isLoading here. So forward the isLoading state to the ingredient form. And in the ingredient form, there we can import the loading indicator from UI loading indicator. So that's a component I prepared for you. It's a little spinner. And then down there, next to the button, we can check props loading. And if that's true, then I want to render the loading indicator. Otherwise, I want to return nothing. By the way, a shortcut for this is that you replace the question mark with and, so with two ampersand signs, and then you omit this colon else case, and now this means this will only get rendered if this is true. It's a little JavaScript syntax where this is checked, and if this is true, this gets rendered, or this gets returned, and in this case, since we're in React, this gets rendered. So now if loading is true, we should see an indicator. We're setting loading when we add ingredients. Let's also do it when we remove ingredients. There I call setIsLoading, set it to true initially, and only once it is deleted, so here in the then block, I'll set it to false because we're not loading anymore. So if we save this, now if we add chocolate1, we should see a loading spinner here, and we do. And if I now delete something, we also see one. So that's a bit better. And of course, we could do something similar when we're loading all ingredients initially. We'll take care about this later. For now, this is what I wanted to show you though. Let's next handle errors. Things also could go wrong. Let's say for removing, we get an error. And Firebase, unfortunately, kind of is really stable, so we probably won't get an error there. But if I remove the S here in JSON, we'll force a technical error. Therefore, now if I click on chocolate, actually this keeps on spinning, this doesn't get removed, and here we see we have an erroneous request. We got an error, but we're not handling it. And that's not a great user experience because it's not obvious to the user who hasn't the developer tools open what went wrong. So we want to handle errors like this. Now with fetch, since it returns a promise, we can handle errors by adding catch here. And catch will get the error and then allows us to do whatever we want with that error. Now here, I want to output my error modal and show a nice error message if something goes wrong. Therefore, I'll import the error modal from the UI folder and there error modal.js and render this if we have an error. Hence, we need to manage an extra piece of state. Error and set error with use state. And initially, I pass no value in there because we have no error. Initially, it's just undefined or null initially. But now we can call set error whenever we got an error. So let's say, because here I know that we'll have one, in the remove ingredient handler, in the catch block here, we call set error, and I set error.message as a value. Every error object by default has a message property. So I'm setting this message as a field or as a value for error. And you can, of course, manage whatever you want in here. You can also set your own message, like something went wrong, anything like that. And I'll do that here because the predefined message might be really cryptic to users, so I showed this one. Now we can output the error modal if error is set. So if that error state is set. For this here, in this div, I want to check if error is true. Remember, error is my error state. So if error is true, and if it is, using the same shortcut as before, I'll render the error modal. So this only gets rendered if error is set. And then to the error modal, I pass my error message, and that's just what I store in error. Now, error modal actually is a component which tries to call on close if we click the backdrop or the OK button. So I'll add on close here, and there I want to execute a function that clears the error. So I'll add a new function, clear error, or whatever you want to name it. And in the end, what this does is it calls set error and sets this back to null. And if that is null, this error modal will also disappear because this condition will not be satisfied anymore. Null is treated as false, and therefore this won't get rendered. So here on close, I will point at clear error. So at this function, which should get executed if on close is triggered. In addition to setting the error here, I also want to set is loading to false here. Because even with the error, we are not loading anymore, so the loading spinner here should disappear. Otherwise, that will keep on going. Now, if we save this, and I click on that, I get that error modal. If I click OK, we're done. That's also another important thing you have to understand regarding how React works. React also batches state updates. I'm naming it set state here because whenever you call a set whatever it is, function from use state, this will of course trigger a state update. And there React has a mechanism for batching multiple updates together to avoid unnecessary render cycles. So when you set your new state, no matter which approach you use, React batches these state updates. So that also means that right in the next line after calling set new state, you can't immediately use the new state because React won't go ahead and update the state and skip all the other code. Instead, it will execute all the other code in the same function and batch all state updates you scheduled there together. So all state updates from one and the same synchronous event handler, that's important, synchronous, are batched together. That's a bit theoretic. What does this mean? It means that here in clear error, for example, I have set error and set is loading. This is in the same function. These two steps are executed synchronously after each other. So even if that were in a then block, if both are in the same then block, then these two always run right after each other, and then React batches these two state updates together. So this will not mean that set error causes a re-render cycle and set is loading causes another one, but we'll only have one render cycle here, which updates both states, or which reflects both state updates to be precise. And looking at that, set is loading is actually wrong here in clear error, or not wrong, but you might also argue that you want to move it here where you set the error initially, then this spinning icon also disappears right when the modal opens, of course, because we're setting loading at the same point of time we're setting the error. But these two again will be batched together, so it's not two render cycles that are executed to show the error modal and to remove the spinner, but it's one and the same render cycle which already has both state updates taken into account. So that's how React batches state updates and how you can handle error with a separate state, of course, where you store errors and then react to them appropriately.